The clock on the wall measured the silence, each tick echoing against the dim office walls. It was past 8 p.m. Hannah closed the final folder of the day, her fingers lingering on the edge of the paper. Her shoulders burned with the dull, constant ache of hours spent leaning forward, listening and analyzing. She looked up. The empty chair across from her had held 5 different people since sunrise. 5 lives, 5 sets of anxieties, 5 hours of focused, singular attention. She stood and walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker to life in the distance. The math was inescapable. She had the expertise to guide them, yet the day only offered so much time. Every person she helped meant another she had to turn away. The clock ticked again, a steady, relentless reminder of the barrier between her knowledge and those still waiting for it. She reached for her water glass, but her hand stopped mid-air. The limitation was not her ability, it was the room. It was the chair. It was the physical reality of being in only one place at one time. The door clicked shut, the latch engaging with a sharp final sound. Hannah remained still. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation system. She looked at the chair. It held the ghost of the last hour, the indent of someone who had just left, seeking answers she had provided. She turned to her desk and began stacking the files, aligning the edges with precise, rhythmic movements. The work was done for the night, but the problem remained. She walked to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of her reference texts, feeling the weight of the information contained within them. It was trapped, static, bound by ink and paper. She pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer, the leather cover cool and smooth under her palm. She sat down, ignoring the ache in her back, and clicked her pen. The tip hovered over the white page for a long, heavy moment. She pressed down, the ink bleeding into the fiber as she formed the letters. One by one, she wrote, "How to help 1,000 people at once." She stared at the sentence. It was not a request for an answer. It was a declaration of war against the limits of her time. She scavenged the office for a tripod but found none. Instead, she piled 4 heavy medical journals on the edge of her desk. Stacking them until the height aligned with her eye level, she balanced her small camera atop the stack, securing it with a strip of tape. The frame was crooked. She adjusted the books, tilting them a millimeter at a time, until the composition felt centered. She sat in the chair, cleared her throat, and stared into the glass lens. The red light blinked, a tiny, steady pulse in the dark room. She pressed record. "Confidence isn't a trait," she said, her voice sounding thin against the office walls. "It is a muscle." She stumbled over the next sentence, paused, and started again. She spent an hour trimming the silence from the start and end of the file. She uploaded the video to the platform and waited. She checked the dashboard at midnight, then again at dawn. The counter displayed 3 views. 2 were her own tests. 1 was a stranger who clicked away after 6 seconds. The screen was stark, quiet, and offered no validation. She looked at the camera, then back at the empty, silent room, and reached for the power button to shut the system down. She did not turn the system off. Instead, she left the camera on the stack of books. Each evening, as the last client left, the cycle began anew. The office became a production lab. She spent hours deconstructing complex psychological theories into index cards, scribbling notes until the ink smudged. She broke down anxiety, imposter syndrome, and decision fatigue into 3-minute, actionable sequences. Her evenings vanished. She recorded while the city lights outside her window blurred into long, static lines. She learned to adjust the lighting with a desk lamp, angling the shade to eliminate harsh shadows on her face. She learned to edit out the stutter, the hesitation, and the long pauses that broke the flow of her logic. She built a library of content. Every night, she uploaded a new file into the digital void. There was no feedback, no surge of subscribers, no validation. Only the hum of the cooling fan and the mechanical click of the upload bar completing its progress. She moved with a methodical, unyielding pace, treating every video as a brick in an invisible foundation. She was teaching herself to communicate with an audience that did not yet exist. The notification arrived at midnight. It was a simple, flat chime from her laptop. Hannah leaned forward, eyes squinting at the screen, expecting another system alert. Instead, she found a comment. A student from a university 3 states away had typed a paragraph thanking her for the video on imposter syndrome. The student described how those specific techniques helped them navigate a final exam. Hannah read the words once, then twice, tracing the lines with her cursor. Minutes later, a professional in a different city messaged her, detailing how her advice on decision fatigue had changed their approach to a career shift. The silence of the office felt different now. It was no longer an empty void, but a workspace connected to a network. She gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. She looked at the camera, still mounted on its stack of journals, and saw it not as a recording device, but as a bridge. Her knowledge was no longer locked behind the door of her office. It was moving, shifting, and finding purchase in lives she had never touched. She stood up, paced the small room, and reached for her notebook to start planning the next series of topics. Hannah cleared her desk, abandoning the index cards for a whiteboard. She spent weeks mapping out a curriculum, grouping her insights into modules, tests, and actionable exercises. This was no longer just advice. It was a product. She invested her savings into a hosting platform, worrying over every line of code and every payment gateway. The process was exhausting. She worked until her eyes burned, fine-tuning the video quality and the automated email sequences that would guide her students. She risked her reputation on this structure, wondering if the audience that watched for free would follow her into a paid program. She sat before the final dashboard, her finger hovering over the publish button. The air in the room felt heavy. She checked the server status one last time, her pulse visible in her wrist. She didn't want to just be heard anymore. She wanted to be accountable. She clicked the button. The screen flashed, confirming the launch. She sat back, listening to the silence of her office, waiting to see if anyone would show up for what she had built. The gamble had begun, and there was no way to recall the signal now that it was live. The first hour passed in agonizing stillness. Then, the dashboard spiked. A single registrant, then 10, then 100. The numbers ticked upwards so rapidly that the counter blurred into a smear of pixels. Hannah leaned in, her breath fogging the corner of the monitor. Suddenly, the screen went black. A text box appeared. Error 503. The server had ceased to respond. She hit refresh. The page hung, the loading icon spinning in a frantic, endless loop. She reached for the phone, intending to call the hosting service, but stopped. A notification popped up in the corner of her secondary screen. Thousands of new user alerts were pouring into her inbox, one after another, like a physical weight pressing against her digital space. She stood up, knocking her chair back against the wall. The silence of her office was replaced by the frantic hum of the cooling fan working overtime. She wasn't just reaching a few people. She had triggered a movement. She looked at the frozen error message and realized her vision had outgrown the infrastructure. She had expected a trickle, but she had invited a tide. She stepped away from the desk, hands shaking, watching the inbox counter climb past 3,000 in less than an hour. Hannah acted within the hour. She cleared the desk, removed the single camera, and brought in a team of developers to stabilize the site. The office transformed. Desks replaced bookshelves. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting servers that hummed with constant activity. She didn't just need help, she needed a system. She interviewed dozens of psychologists and educators, vetting their methods against the framework she had pioneered. Her role shifted from recording sessions to signing contracts and managing workflows. She hired a team to handle the logistics of customer support, freeing her to focus on curriculum depth. Every day brought a new challenge: scaling the video production, securing legal frameworks, and ensuring the quality of the content remained consistent across thousands of users. She worked from a new, larger office, moving between meeting rooms filled with whiteboards covered in project timelines. The transition was rapid and relentless. She recruited experts in pedagogy to translate her concepts into deeper, interactive modules. By the end of the month, the organization was fully staffed. The individual therapist had vanished, replaced by the head of a massive educational movement. She stood in the center of the new headquarters, watching the team coordinate, and realized the scale of the operation now demanded her full attention as a director. The stage lights hit with the force of a physical wall, blinding Hannah to the thousands of people sitting in the dark. She stepped forward, the soles of her shoes clicking sharply against the polished wooden floor. She gripped the metal microphone, its cold surface grounding her pulse. As she waited for the room to settle into total silence, her vision flickered. She was not in a grand auditorium anymore. She was back in her office, staring at a stack of worn books and a small, dusty camera lens. The memory was sharp, vivid, and sudden. The hum of the cooling fan from her old setup echoed in her mind, clashing with the heavy, expectant silence of the crowd. She looked out into the vast, dark void of the theater, trying to reconcile the memory of that one flickering red light with the thousands of faces she knew were watching her now. She blinked, forcing the past to recede. The weight of the moment settled into her chest. She stood tall, adjusted her grip on the mic, and scanned the rows, realizing that every single person sitting in the dark was a result of the work she had started alone in that quiet, empty room. Hannah leaned toward the microphone, the metallic sound of her breath echoing through the vast space. She looked directly into the front row, then swept her gaze across the hidden thousands. Her posture straightened. "Knowledge is only potential," she said, her voice steady and projecting to the furthest corners of the room, "until you serve it to the world." The silence held for a heartbeat, then shattered. The sound of applause started as a low rumble and surged into a roar that vibrated through the floorboards under her feet. She stood firm, watching the movement of the crowd as they rose from their seats in a wave of motion. Her hands relaxed at her sides. She felt the weight of the years behind her, but the pressure was gone, replaced by a sharp sense of clarity. This was not a final destination. The screens behind her flashed with the next phase of her global curriculum. She watched the data points sync in real time, mapping out the connections she had yet to forge. She smiled, turned from the microphone, and walked toward the exit. The auditorium lights remained bright, and the work continued. She stepped off the stage, already planning the next chapter of the mission.